Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome to another exciting and informative session here at our Rusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. I'm excited today to have George Dell with us. George, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Absolutely fantastic. And as is always the case, this podcast is only possible because it actually resonates with so many people. We appreciate you taking the time to not only subscribe to the podcast, but when you like it, that gets further distribution out to more people so they can hear this. Plus, you just generously sharing it. So we appreciate everybody doing that same thing. So, friends, please take that action. And in the meantime, George, everybody wants to know, were you born this way, or what was going on in your life that got you into the appraisal and valuation profession?
Born this way? You mean like weird?
Welcome to the profession. I guess you're in the right spot.
It was an accident. Actually, by education, most of my education was accounting and economics. And I was working as a controller of a company, and that's another long story. And a friend of mine says, my boyfriend and I are going to go on vacation. He needs just somebody to take over his office for a week while we're gone. And I said, oh, okay, no problem. Well, that's where it started. What I didn't know at the time was that he had 6 months experience, and he's who I learned from. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The good news was that we were stationed in an MAI's office, and there was a lot of other very experienced appraisers around.
Oh, okay. Holy cow, that's quite the long step off the short plank is what it sounds like to me.
Right. It was a good lesson. The MAI's name was Jerry Kibbe, and he was one of the top expert witness guys in town. Had a large office, several people, and he had this big room in the back in the days when all data was paper. And
yes.
He had a rule that any appraiser could come into his office and use all his data. He had all the MLS scores, everything he could possibly find. Just let him know that you're coming. And I remember thinking, my thought, well, that's silly. He's giving away all this data to all his competition.
Yes.
The reality was everybody in town owed the guy. Everybody loved Jerry Kibbe. So it was a huge lesson in the backside of doing service work rather than selfish work.
That's a great way to put it. Service work versus selfish. Holy cow. So give a sense of the time when you were invited into this environment. What year was that?
That would have been 81, I believe. Yeah. Everything was still on paper. The MLS books came out every 3 months. So basically, by the time they got printed and sent out, your most recent comp was 4 months old already. The listing books came out, I believe, monthly. And then they had a hot sheet that came out, I believe, once a week. So to get actually current data, you had to verify and confirm it through public records. And I think that's part of where this whole concept of what is confirming, what is verifying has changed over the years. And nobody's redefined what it really is.
Well, it's such a great reference point because a lot of people that listen to the podcast may not have started the industry in 1981, so they don't even have that sense of MLS books. They don't have the sense of recency being, oh yeah, it's something that happened in the past year, and we're excited that there's something in the past year. It's not just a one-line listing necessarily. There might even be like a little black and white photo of it. It isn't necessarily clear or easy to see, but nonetheless, that was as good as data was back in the day.
Yeah, and on the commercial side, there were no books. There were only public records and who you knew. Who you know was absolutely important. I remember, you'd get a couple of comps and maybe a third comp, then you wait for that a fourth comp, the best one you had, and that real estate agent was on vacation. You got that phone call, and you go, oh, man, I'm almost done with my appraisal. You fill in that one page, you hand it to the typist. A day and a half later, you get your rough draft back, and you go over and get your red pen out,
Yeah.
We make notes, give it back to the typist, and depending on, whether he or she had a good day or not and how backed up everybody was, within 2 or 3 days, you got back your final version.
Yes.
And off it went. We had a great turnaround, 3-4 weeks. No problem.
No problem. No problem at all. What was it? What was it like for you back in '81, getting exposed to this profession, and then why did you stay early on?
Well, for me, it was partly an accident. I had gone through some career guidance counseling at that time, prior to that. And I took this test, which had four quadrants. One was like marketing type person. One was cooperative with people. Other was analytic. And I can't remember what the 4 quadrant was, but I took that test. I landed right square in the middle. And I realized that most of my life, this is part of the larger career guidance thing, that I did really well at almost anything I tried for about a month or two. And then I'd either get bored or look for some other out. I didn't realize that it was a psychological, emotional tendency. Well, appraisal filled all 4 of those quadrants. I got the analytics. I got to sit alone in an office. I had got a chance to talk to people, make confirming telephone calls. Oh, so exciting! And the analytics. So I was able to fulfill all 4 of those quadrants according to the psychology of what my tendencies were.
Who knew that appraisal was a 4 quadrants kind of opportunity and not just 1 or 2 of them?
Yeah. So I've loved it ever since and still do.
Oh, that is fantastic. And it sounds like it was just a bit of almost a haphazard opportunity. It wasn't as though you went looking for it or it found you. It just, as we said, someone asked you to fill in for a short period.
Absolutely. I did that for a short while. I went back to my earlier career and I got hired on by a turnaround situation of a company because I had a management background and the accounting controller background. And a year later, basically worked myself out of a job there and came back into it. Another fellow offered me to work with him because of my commercial background. But let me get one thing straight. I've always enjoyed doing houses more than commercial work. And today I'm retired basically, but I do some work. I do expert witness work, 2 or 3, 4, 5 a year. And it's almost entirely residential. My expertise is value of views. View value is the primary thing. This involves encroachments and weird stuff like that. Man, I recently did a case on fire damage from a fire from 4 or 5 years ago. The litigation goes on.
especially those type of cases, which for most people that may not be aware of it, it's not uncommon at all that you could
I love doing it. It's fun. And I feel like I'm doing, able to do a good job for the people that need me and a fair job.
Oh, that's fantastic that they get an opportunity to work with someone who values views and that ability to come to a credible conclusion, support it, and help them with whatever matter they're working on. So what was it, you mentioned you got that opportunity to come in under someone who'd already been 6 months ahead of you in the profession. For you, being in an office with an MAI and getting exposed to a number of people coming in because of all the data that was available, I mean, that must have seemed, in hindsight, so fortuitous, because that was not the way it was for a number of people that came into the profession having so much access.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to throw in a quick story. That same girlfriend that got me connected with the fellow Phil that trained me, she had a secretarial office, and I remember her telling him and us, you guys really would look much more professional if you actually type your reports instead of just writing them out. We wrote them out with a pencil, and then I got a copy machine and made the photocopies and signed those appraisal reports. Yeah, when I became an appraisal, to answer your question, basically there were only 2 or 3 paths into it. You could be born into it. Usually it was dad. In some rare situations, mom was the appraiser or a couple. Why a couple? Because the dad was an appraiser and brought mom into the profession. And then they had a kid who would then become an appraiser. The other pathway was basically secretarial. You were lucky, most women in particular, back in those days, get a job as a secretary or an office manager is much too tighty. Then you have to pay somebody more, right? Yeah, secretary. And then, they do it for a year or two and pick up enough about it. Asked to go out in the field a couple of times. I'm pretty sure they were good enough to do it. Fill out the form. So on the residential side, it was fill out the form. Adjustments were no problem. Whoever trained you gave you an adjustment sheet. And to this day, my sheet still says $35 per square foot. It's worked for 35 years. Why wouldn't it work tomorrow?
I love that you still have that sheet. That's so telling. especially as we'll get into some other things that you're involved in now. What a great motivation.
That's the way it is. That's the way it was. Yeah.
Wow. So how long did you stay in that environment with that firm?
Oh, gosh. Well, just Phil and me. Yeah, he did hire a couple other people. We ended up trading another fellow who actually got his MAI before I did. And I remember the first day I took him out in the field, it was Saturday, and we inspected 5 properties and did most of the comps from all of them. Now, back in those days, it took me a week to do an appraisal. I mean, if I could crank 3 appraisals in a week, that was pushing. And I could just see the cash register thing going off as it's 5 times $85 is, I'm going to be rich. But it was, I had to reassure him that this was highly unusual. I inspected 5 properties. The same part of town. He ended up moving, doing apartment buildings for FHA, I believe, and all over the country. He became the apartment specialist. He moved to a town in Oregon a place he wanted to live rather than where he had to live. So a lot of freedom if you organize your work around your long-term goals.
I like that. Opportunities where you want to live versus where you have to live. That's a wonderful way to align for life.
Right.
So you take him out. He gets all excited that he too can work on 5 assignments at $85 a piece on one day and take the next 5 weeks to get them done.
Well, wait a minute now. I had when I worked with Phil, I had a really good cut. It was 50%. That was pretty high back in those days.
Ooh, that was high back in those days.
Yeah, and that was 50% of $65. And $37.50. That was my first fee, $37.50 for a full appraisal. So I don't want to hear anybody whining. No whining. Not whining.
Oh my God.
Who's whining?
Wow. So
I think appraisers are underpaid. So
they're way underpaid. It's stupidly underpaid. That's a whole other soapbox I'm happy to get on, but not today because this is your opportunity to be a guest, not my event. So,
right.
I mean, what I love about the opportunity for you coming back in 81. I mean, you literally have lived, persevered, and grown through so many experiences, over the last 4.5 decades. And
sure.
As you pointed, this, coming and when you came in, living through licensing, living through the, development, or in so many cases of the profession. But I mean, when you're going back through that period of the 80s, what was that like for people that were not in the profession at that time, from the early 80s to the late 80s?
The people that were not in the profession?
A lot of people who listened to the podcast were not in the profession. And that period of the 80s, they have no perspective of what it was like for you as someone who was being called upon as an expert, as a professional valuer, as an appraiser, to actually do what you were called to do.
Well, that's interesting. Just earlier this morning, before I connected with you, I've been on this one committee for several months now, a Collateral Risk Network, and it's the committee on the upcoming UAD, the Uniform Appraisal Data Set. The second one, I guess, is UAD 3 or 4, whatever it is, and it's a big change in itself, but it's going to enable some other changes, certainly on the data side. And the topic came up there. Oh gosh, did I lose track of what I was going to say? Yeah, the changes have been tremendous. We've gone from this these other people, there's 3 people on the call this morning, and I remember they all agreed that back in those days, most of them have been around for a while, the appraisers owned the data. If you want to know something about property sales or the market, you found an appraiser. Today, we went from selling data to the day where we buy the data. And that's kind of a big shift. And yet nobody noticed. Nobody noticed because it took place over a period of about 25, 30 years. And yet the change is tremendous. Back in those days, just gathering the data was 60, 70, 80% of the job, of the work. You get the data, you take that deep breath, I'm almost done. Today, you push a button in 0.3 of a second, you got all the data you could possibly ever need. The problem today is basically, this is stuff I teach, the stats, graphs, and data science class, is the problem is different. The problem today is how do you get the right data? That's 80% of the algorithms and the thinking. What truly is similarity? What is competitive? What is a market? The word market is not very well defined. And yet I've seen people use 2 or 3 different definitions of market in the same sentence, just whatever's convenient. Here, this is something so fundamental to our profession, and yet nobody has actually defined the market. At least not very well.
No, not very well per se. And then taking that into account and going back to the 80s, so many people having not had that experience of maybe being alive or at least being in the profession at that point. What was that experience for you as someone in the field and dealing with clients through those escalating times?
Dealing with clients. The only word that jumps into my mind offhand is resistance to change. I think our profession has been blessed with what I call the 5 frictions or 4 frictions that keeps us in the past into what I call the 1900s model of appraisal. What I teach, of course, is the data science, the modern analytic data focused methodology. And pardon me, I lose track of my thoughts sometimes where the hell I was going with that. I'll go off. You pull me back to where we were going here.
Yeah. So the question was, share a little bit about the experience of being an appraiser in the 1980s, given the economics of the country and what happened to the real estate market.
Okay, well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer you. I want to go back to my 5 frictions. The frictions are basic resistance to change from those paper models, from how hard the whole appraisal model was built in the 1930s, 1940s. Very few real changes after that. We got better data. We got spreadsheets. We got discounted cash flows on the commercial side. We got MLS. So there's a resistance to change. The education we get continues to be 1900s appraisal stuff. Well, we're not taught the ideal data set, which is all the competitive market. We're still picking comps. Well, the evolution of that, to answer your question, if now you can pick comps in 30 seconds instead of 3 hours, you get lazy. And you just and you say, "Wow, appraising is so easy now," and people, and that's part of the undercutting of fees is our own fault. Back in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, especially in down markets, and I say our own fault, not our fault as appraisers, as individuals, or even as a group, but as a part of those 5 frictions. Another friction is USPEP. USPEP also was written basically 60, 70 years ago and continues to work on the model of the way appraisal was then. The only really nice thing there is that the Standard 1-4 specifically says you should use all the relevant data. Standard 1-4. Nowhere in USPEP do you find the words, pick your best 3 comps. Nowhere. It says use the best data available that's relevant. to make it short. And that's what the data science approach or evidence-based valuation approach is. Another friction, government regulation. If you don't continue doing it the old way, you're going to get in trouble. We're going to threaten you with taking away your license. Another friction is the very underwriters and reviewers at the lenders. They have the same training. They have the same licenses. They're going to catch you. Well, why are you using this newfangled stuff? On top of that, USPAP says you should do what everybody else does in the scope of work. The two tests of an adequate scope of work is it what your clients expect? Oh, wait a minute. What does my client expect? Oh, I've got to hit the number. Yeah, got it. I can do that. Or the second test is, are you doing what your peers do? So as long as you do it the way everybody has been doing and continues to do it, you're going to be okay. But don't dare try to get out of the box and do it better. Peers' actions and client expectations. So those are your frictions, all holding us back.
Yeah, the peer action, the client expectations have not gone away. Don't see them going away anytime soon.
Everything from a lot of basic human psychology of not wanting to change. It's too hard, I'm sorry. You gave me an opportunity to be on my soapbox, so there you go.
Well, what was so fascinating and the experience that you had the opportunity to live through was with the early 80s coming out of the 70s and that high level of inflation, as that started to settle down and we see the growth and we see the expansion that happened in the 80s and then the change in the tax rates, the tax cuts back from, Reagan's agenda, but the growing of the federal deficit. I mean, it was a very different time for owners and investors in commercial real estate. You mentioned yourself being someone who spent the time and the effort to get your designation, the MAI designation. And so all of that ultimately plays into it.
Yeah, speaking of growth, I mean, in the 70s, my hair was about as long as yours, but I think my hair was much cuter than yours, much, much cuter.
I'm sure it was, actually. I'm sure it was.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was there in Vietnam, right along the DMZ and the Marine Corps. I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, believe it or not. When I got back, I became a hippie. So I've had my foot in both. I've had my foot in both sandboxes all the rest of my life.
Absolutely love that.
And that's my political position. So there you are.
I love it. It sits well, and I can very much appreciate that as someone who's always had hair as short as yours my whole life. Only until that movie A Star Is Born with Lady Gaga, Bradley Cooper came out, and my wife's desire for me to, broaden my horizons. Did a long hair ever come into existence for me, George? What a role reversal for both of us.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I keep avoiding your questions because my mind just, my brain has a mind of its own, and that's the way it is.
I understand. Hey, that's the beauty of the opportunities to do expert witness work is you learn how to answer a question, not always the question asked. So that's a big learning for some people here getting to take in this podcast.
Good point. I think a part of it leading off of that was if anybody wants to get into expert witness work or anything beyond lending work, having that ability to connect the left brain with the right brain, the bullet point thinking. So, you've covered the points at the same time, be creative. And if you can connect those two parts of your brain through critical thinking, it makes it glib. The expert witness work I do, one of the most gratifying things to me is when you're sitting there in the witness stand and you're done and the judge turns you and says, "Thank you for helping us understand." That is gratifying. So it's not just the money. The money's great. I love working with attorneys. They're all different personalities, so you kind of have to get used to that. They're in control, but they're everyone different. You got to figure them out as much as anything else. It's fascinating.
The market right now is tough for appraisal companies. Many companies are having a hard time getting enough work with the same marketing they used to. Is your company struggling, having a hard time getting new customers, or getting additional work from existing customers? The answer to this problem is easier than you think. Do more business with the people you already know. Over 10 years, the average U.S. appraisal firm meets over 17,000 potential customers. That's a lot of people you could be doing business with right now. but it's a big problem if you don't have a proven process to communicate with them. StoryLex turns this problem into an opportunity to grow. Our advanced AI marketing tool can rebuild your contact lists and harvest long-forgotten communications. Imagine reaching out to everyone you've ever met with just one click. For the cost of 1 or 2 appraisals a month, StoryLex helps you reconnect and market to people who already know you, like you, trust you, and want to do business with you. Act now by contacting StoryLex today to turn your business growth dreams into reality. Email appraisal@storylux.com. That is appraisal at storylux.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode.
No, it really is. It is absolutely fascinating. And that's what makes the podcast so interesting, is because there is that opportunity to connect with individuals like yourself and others who've seen so much over a period of time. And as you touched on, there was a period of time when, hey, you went out, see 5 properties in a day. It took a week to get the report done with other people involved in the process. And it was exciting if you actually got 3 reports done in a week. To today, we've moved from an environment, as you talked about, where valuers and appraisers used to be the source of quality data. And that was, in this case, paper old because it wasn't digital back then. Today, the data is digital in many cases. And appraisers are now on the opposite side of the equation, having to actually buy the data, how much that's changed. Sure. So when you look back through those changes, how long did you continue to do the commercial valuation work before you more heavily focused on residential?
Well, for me, it was much easier than for most because of my college degree in accounting. I never really wanted to be an accountant, but I figured that was one of the best ways to truly understand business, from the grassroots. So I'm not sure how to answer that. If you're trying to get from residential to commercial, you really got to sign up with a commercial appraiser. And it takes a lot longer if you don't have the college. I really believe the college education is much more important in doing commercial work, income property work, than for residential. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of MAIs who try to do a house and say, I will never do another house ever again in my life, because it really is a different animal. But I have to say,
so true. It's so funny.
The stuff we teach, the statistical, the stuff we teach in stats, graphs, data science classes in our curriculum, and the community of asset analysts, the methods we teach, they're not really statistical, they're analytics, they're evidence-based valuation, is equally applicable to both residential and commercial work. I mean, and it's, to put it simply, just like usually the size of a house, dollars per square foot is your key variable. On the income property side, typically your key variable is simply the income flow, the cap rate. And the analysis of each of those in terms of putting graphs on it, or mean, median, mode, or looking at the curve, outliers, weird stuff, that takes judgment. They're the same. They're identical. And then we're saddled with limited data, no matter what's commercial or residential. We don't have hundreds or thousands typically, although some on the commercial side, sometimes you do have like cap rates for hotels around the country. Now you've got thousands of data points, but that's a reference point. It's not unique to your subject property or your directly competitive market area.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Given and what you're speaking to is body of knowledge, if you've really worked hard to evolve in recent years, how long were you active in the field and actively appraising before your roles changed?
Oh, from residential to commercial?
And just appraising in general, but yes.
Well, it took me a year. I got in 81, went back out for about a year and a half, and came back in 83, and I've been an independent appraiser ever since. I've never worked for a bank or a government, anybody. I've always worked for other appraisers until finally I went off on my own. Yeah.
Got it. And then when did you had mentioned that you'll still do few expert witness cases a year. When did you more significantly transition the type of work you were doing into the community?
I'll never. Well, you luck out and you get a job from a lawyer, and your eyes open wide. Oh my God, I can make a lot of money on this one. Well, my worst screw up was that somebody, and I didn't know it at the time, on the opposing side called me up for information about my appraisal. It was a divorce case. And divorce cases can be the messiest and pay you the least amount.
Oh, those nasty.
Everybody's mad and cheap. And the law, oh, God bless them. The lawyers that do a lot of divorce work tend to be least competent in real estate and that type of thing. They know how to do trial work and negotiation. They're good in their other areas. And I got chewed out by my clients. What are you doing telling them information? I had totally destroyed the confidence thing, which is far stricter than it is just for our usual appraisal work. But you know what? They tricked me. They also intentionally tricked me. I'm working on this case, and I understand you've done this. And what do they sensed that I was new and stupid, and sure enough, I proved them right.
Well, you didn't stay new and stupid for very long.
No, I learned how to work at being smarter from that point on. Careful.
But that's the nature of the industry. I mean, everybody is new and stupid at some point. The goal is just not to stay there.
Well, I didn't have any education at the time. The AIs had some excellent education, litigation work. I also lucked out and had a good mentor who was not only an appraiser, but also had a law degree and taught.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, he actually taught at USC. Yeah. Wow. That's an adjunct professor.
That's how long were you able to work in that environment?
With him? Oh, he was. I worked a few cases with him. That's about it. He connected with me because of my strength in the statistical analysis thing. In valuing a view, it's difficult. There's no way the human brain can put a number to the value of a view that's so wide and so deep and what's there. However, there's a whole discipline called non-parametric statistics. And I had a couple of graduate level classes entirely devoted to that after I was an appraiser. So my brain was already attuned to using some really, at that time, it was a really very sophisticated statistical graduate level stuff in econometrics and statistics, but apply it to that. And I said, wait a minute, this is really not that difficult. In fact, I'll go through with you if it'll take a half a minute here.
Go ahead, George.
Like how wide is the view? Well, wider is better. Well, the human brain is really good at telling more from less, wider from narrower. But now we can refine that a little bit. We can say, okay, this is a 0 view. 0 to 5 degrees is a 1. 5 to 10, 15 degrees is a 2. 15 to 30 degrees is a 3. 30 to 45 is a 4. 45 to 90 is a 5. To 80 is 6. And the house on top of the hill is a 7. 180-degree view. Now I put a number to it. Now that number doesn't represent a dollar amount. However, it's ordinal. It's not parametrics is ordinal. In other words, you can put 1 through 7 in order. So now you know in a number what's better or worse. Well, to make a long story short, I did that for the height of the view, the quality of the view, how obstructed is it. Usually there's 4 or 5 separate subcomponents, which I go through the same process. Well, now how do I get the 0 view? Well, it's the house at the bottom of the hill, or the lot that's sold at the bottom of the hill. It's got 0 view. Oh, 0 is 0. Hey, that's pretty solid information. 0 is 0. House at the top of the hill with that 180-degree view. Well, how do I get the view value from that? Well, it's sold for $1.5 million. The site at the bottom of the hill was worth $400,000. So sites in this area, where a place where you can build a house, is about $400,000, whether it's at the bottom of the hill or the top of the hill. Okay, so the top of the hill, that leaves $1.1 million. Oh, okay. I go to the cost approach now. Say, look, it costs $600,000 to build this house. It's depreciated 20%. No, that leaves. Okay, so there's $900,000 left for the view. Oh, and view is equal to a 7. I divide the 900,000 by 7, and that's my dollar per score amount. And it's called non-parametric statistics. When I took the graduate level class at San Diego State, I was blown out. Sometimes non-parametric, ordinal numbers like this, which are really qualitative. Qualitative data turned into quantitative data. Works better than the difficult inferential statistics that we were taught from the 6th grade on, 7th grade, junior high school. It was all about inferential statistics, taking random samples. You don't need to do a random sample if you got all the data. And you can get all the data in 3 seconds today. So here's this entire body of knowledge, inferential statistics, which continues to be taught to appraisers as a part of our licensing that's totally useless to us. Wow, listen to that's a higher soapbox than you even thought I'd ever get on. This is why I get irritated and why I try to give back to this wonderful profession that I really enjoy. It's been okay.
When were you taking those courses at USD? What kind of time frame?
Well, I started in the 90s, basically, and continued for 16 years. Basically, every semester I would take basically 2 classes, sometimes one, sometimes. But a lot from San Diego State, and econometrics was a primary spot, statistics, some math, some insurance, which is risk analysis, and then a bunch of classes out of CSD. I took every graduate level class at San Diego State, and most of them in UCSD. UCSD is very theoretical. San Diego State is very practical. So I was getting some of the same material from both viewpoints. Huge confidence builder. And I remember talking to professors about the uniqueness of the appraisal problem, the limited data we have. It's called multidimensional nature of our problem. You got more unknowns than you have data. How do you deal with that? It's really a unique situation. And it took me years to basically figure that out. Our profession is finally today getting to admit that adjustments are effectively impossible to calculate. Because of if they were easy to calculate, they wouldn't have named us 30 years ago. They would have figured out with AVMs. Okay, so that's our opportunity. That's our opportunity for the future. How do we handle that? We can make the right decisions, but we have to have the underlying knowledge, competence, and it's all software.
Yes, and I think that's the interesting opportunity from a perspective and an experience share that opens up the minds for some people, clouds the minds for others, but also provides perspective for what's possible when they get to hear, like, oh my goodness, here's someone, maybe I don't know George, don't know any of the work that George has done in recent years. I've heard a little bit now about his perspective, but where did that come from? Well, it's a constant effort and investment in one's own knowledge development. And that opens up the very considerations for, hey, how can this profession evolve? Well, evidence-based valuation is definitely one of those paths.
Right. You got some pretty lights behind your head there. It just makes your hair sparkle. I don't know if you realize that.
I mean, I should go get some of these from my place. I mean, today is the first time ever we're doing a recording in a different setting, and it's good to know with video, no less. We get those special lights. Like, it's not exactly a halo, but we're working on it. We're working on it.
No, I see a bright future. I see a bright future for appraisers. I think there's going to be less of us, no doubt about it. But the ones that are left need to know the kind of judgment, competence, and software that will be needed in the future, not last year. The easy stuff is long ago been done. The AVMs took a good chunk of. We should have been in charge of AVMs, so the USPAP and some other organizational leadership. Well, some businessmen are ready to jump on an opportunity, and we as individuals, like a herd of cats, we're slow to adapt to that and continue to be slow. As individuals, we can really push forward and be successful, I believe, in the future.
Yeah, say more about that, because that's ultimately how we like to bring this conversation through to a point of fruition and transition. And that is,
Sure.
why is it as you look out over the next several years that you're so optimistic when so many other people are not?
Well, starting with the very present, as of March 1st, I think you probably are aware, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac will be absolutely requiring market analysis on every appraisal. That includes, if you think the market's level, you got to show the same work as it would be if you thought the market went up 0.1% or down 0.5% over a 3-month period. It is going to be required. There's some very specific requirements. I know this will be replaying later, but this Wednesday, I'm doing an interview with Lyle Radke from Fannie Mae. Yeah, I thought you knew that. That's Wednesday, and that'll be about an hour and a half, and he'll be covering. We'll be asking him questions. I'll be the interviewer on that, and then we'll take a short break, and after that, we're doing a free 2-hour webinar on it's an overview on basically time adjustments is a core part of it. It's a part of market conditions, market analysis. It's not the complete part, but it's about 70% of it. And the requirements are very specific in USPAP. The requirements are very specific. What was the Federal Housing Finance Agency kind of, I think, was the motivator. They're pushing and prodding on Fannie and Freddie right now. Certainly, the regulations, what we were taught, there's some very precise stuff there, and some very clear-cut requirements in the GSE, the Fannie Freddie guidelines. So the guidelines, and they're fairly complex. The first time you see them, you go, "Oh my God, this is huge." But the reality, now, this is my opinion, I don't think it's that hard to do the best. They give these options of doing. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are in a tough position. That if they tell appraisers exactly the algorithm, the model to use, they've gone beyond. Now they're taken away from you. And I like when the 1004 MC came out, that market conditions thing. See, I said, wait a minute. If I follow that thing, sometimes it can be wrong. There's something called Simpson's paradox. When you group data, it can actually give you an answer in the wrong direction. Well, yes. Yeah. Simpson's paradox. I learned that in 3 different classes, undergraduate in econometrics and statistics. Simpson's paradox. In fact, when I first started teaching my class about 18, 19 years ago, I created an example of a terrible model. And lo and behold, 4 years later, Fannie and Freddie came up with the 1004 MC, almost duplicated what I was using as an example of a terrible model. How you can go wrong doing the wrong. Yeah. Well, so where was I? So a lot of different regulations and leading to the best way. Look, economists have been doing time series analysis for decades before they even had good data. It's not difficult. It's not new. It's been hashed over by PhDs, hundreds of PhDs, dealing with nuances and how to do time series analysis. How's our problem different? We've got limited data. Some of the time we only have 3 comps. Most of the time we have 10 or 12 comps. Sometimes we have 3,000 comps. How do we take advantage of whatever data we have? That's half the problem. In fact, I'll kind of have to sort of go to a wrap on this in the future. That's data science. Data scientists say the same things about solving problems, which is, they will say universally, 80% of the solution is in the data. 80% of what we do is getting the data right. Now, if you think back earlier in this conversation, you and I, that's what we did. That's what we did 35, 40 years ago. 80% of the problem was getting the right data. We just worked with much more difficult data. But it's still 80%. We digressed from that, got lazy or sloppy. It wasn't just our fault. It was the regulations. It was the peer review. It was what it's expected. It was what we were taught. We were continued to taught to do it the old way. So I lost track of I lose track of my thought. I get so involved in it.
Well, what's helpful around you sharing that perspective where approximately 40 years ago, where the effort was really in getting the data, and you tie that back into data science being 80% of getting towards an answer is in the data. But now there's just either too much data or there's not enough and there's not that understanding in it, where you come back to like, hey, are you actually doing any real scientific analysis? Or, as you talked about earlier, are you just doing some inferential statistics?
Yeah. That's the magic words, data science. What is data science? It's about dealing with when you have all or substantially all of it, how do you do the best? And those of us in the community of asset analysts and graduate courses, once you get the data right, it's just amazing how little need there is for adjustments. The answer almost jumps out at you visually.
Yes.
In tables, maps, what you do. Like, I'm so thrilled that Fannie and Freddie are pushing ahead with this market analysis. Historically, smartest appraiser said appraisal is market analysis. It's not a part of appraisal. It is market analysis. And the picking of prompts was just a make-do way of trying to represent the market that you're going to analyze. That was the best we could do, was 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 concepts. Moving forward, to really get to what you were pushing me towards here, what's the future? I'm amazed at how my own brain gets hurt by artificial intelligence. It's so new. When I teach my classes for long, and by the way, I sell software as a part of my class, and your bill is $0. We use practically nothing but open source software. My current belief is, for the most part, open source software is better supported, more current, timely. You can get more help, friendly people that will love you and understand when you're having problems. When I first started my class, I started out using commercial software Excel and discovered that we were wasting 20-30% of our time on 2 or 3 different versions of Excel, 2 or 3 operating systems. I finally went to an open source spreadsheet called Numeric. And it got really better for me to teach. I could tell the class, everybody had exactly the same software, exactly the same data sets. At push button B, everybody would push button B and get exactly the same answer, and we could go on with the learning. About 5 years ago, I started teaching R, which is really a programming language. It's been around for about 20-25 years. I haven't really enjoyed being a coder or anything like that, but okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and do what I can. Well, very quickly after that came along what's called RStudio, which is a 4-screen interface. It takes advantage of these huge high-resolution screens we got. Now you got 4 screens on your screen, and you don't have to shut down a program and then bring up another one and cut and paste into it. You move your eyes. You take it for granted how fast that is. And the progress within RStudio, all this open source stuff, the updates continue to just amaze me. I can't keep up with it. And we have this large group of people who are, want to be adventurers and help other appraisers. We have about 300 people in our group, by the way, the community of asset analysts, the CAA. Oh, by the way, I should say next month we're having our annual meeting, our 4th annual conference in Las Vegas. So if you're interested, come to my website, georgedell.com. There's information on that. Non-members are welcome to that. Members have to have some education, so we do have that requirement. So that's the data science. But the artificial intelligence is basically going to almost completely then eliminate the need to even think about how hard code is to understand. The stuff I teach has never really required you to be a coder. We just teach how to steal other people's code, how to borrow it. It's all freely available right from the beginning. You just have to adapt it to what you got. Getting the data right, again, is 80% of the problem. Getting your data in. Once you got it in there, I'm almost done with this. And it continues to grow and change. And the only danger is suddenly you've got 3,000 experts in the field. 12 of them are in the appraisal field, and 3 weeks ago they were not experts in any of this stuff, and now they're experts. And by the way, they'll sell it to you for $29.95. Yeah, you get the picture.
I get the picture.
Sudden experts. Yeah. I'm not getting rich teaching this stuff. I love what I'm doing.
We can tell.
It was an act of God to get me into those graduate level classes after I became an appraiser.
Oh, yeah.
I love what I do. My mission statement for my company is to help prevent the next economic meltdown.
Yeah.
We'll see in the next 6 or 8 months, I may have had total failure on my mission statement. We're at a really touchy point here economically. There's a lot of commercial and residential properties that are going to be coming due for new loans, and suddenly they're going to be double, and they don't pencil out anymore, and banks are going to own a lot of commercial properties. We're starting to see some resale problems in residential. Now, this is a negative way of looking at the opportunity for us appraisers. It's going to generate a lot of appraisal work, and it's not going to work with AVMs. It's going to require judgment and competence and comfort in doing some of these methods that we're talking about right here.
Well, it's definitely the case. Definitely more opportunity in the future. So that's what makes podcasts valuable, is that opportunity to hear different perspectives and gain some understanding of how, over a course of a long and storied career, that you can arrive to a point as you've done, creating methodology, creating a rallying cry, if you will, and also leading a pathway forward to what a more evidence-based future can be that supports credible conclusions that stand on their own, not just on, oh, did I pick the right 3? I appreciate that about you, George.
Well, it's my pleasure. And those who aren't going to be able to come to this particular webinar with Lyle next week, we do have 2 or 3 free webinars on my website, georgedell.com.
Great.
Once you take a class, and we connect you with a CAA, and there's a whole pile of free stuff there too.
Fantastic.
It's just a matter of attitude and getting involved.
That's it. You don't get what you don't step up for. So, and I appreciate you stepping up, George. Just want to say thanks for joining us here on this session of our Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a joy. And I know other people really enjoy the way you do things. And get a little personal story. Get away from the drier appraisers. It's more human and personal. Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Well, you're very welcome. It's a joy to learn and grow together. And it's another one of those opportunities. So, friends, thanks so much for joining us. For some of you, you're like, oh, my goodness, I'm so inspired. Others, you're like, I might need to take a break and just digest everything, or even listen to it a second time and go right ahead. George is a wonderful peer, someone who's, as you can tell, very passionate about the work that he does and his desire to continue to express and expand the perspective for the betterment of the whole industry and, for that matter, the whole economy. Hey, George, again, thank you so much. Until the next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.